Liberal democracy undermined Christianity and religion in general and created the situation where we truly are divided.
Tim Keller does a fantastic job describing the nature of the problem we face. He also tries to take solutions off the table, which I think has gotten a lot of us irritated, but I think he still does a fantastic job of describing the nature of the problem. I want you to listen to how Keller talks about this problem, and then also a clip here from Sam's channel, Transfigured, where he grapples with the implications of this problem as well. But this is how Tim frames it.
I think I could trace this out if I was writing something down. I think it'd be a little hard early right now to do it. But weirdly enough, liberal democracy kind of led to the decline of religion, probably. Because it really said, religion is okay for your private life, but when it comes to the public life, we really don't need it. It's really not important. We just use science and reason to figure out how we're going to live. And you park your religion at the door when we come out here and talk together, whether you're a Jew or a Catholic or a Muslim or a Christian or an atheist, you come together and we just decide this. And it was part of, I think, what weakened faith, because it was really saying faith is a private thing. It just makes you happy, but it really isn't all that necessary for how you live your whole life. Whatever. But the fact is that when religion started to decline, the thing that now, I have some atheist friends who admit this, say the thing that actually held us together was not freedom of speech, freedom of association, using our reason. What held us together was like 80% of the population went to either a Catholic or a Protestant church. They actually went. And that even though the liberals and conservatives in Congress were arguing over taxes or unions, but they would never argue over same-sex marriage. They all thought it would be a horrible thing. In other words, everybody was 80-90% of people were nominal Christians. And because they were nominal Christians, they had a moral base, and they lived with the illusion that we're really not a Christian country. We're a secular country. But the fact is, they'd never really had to deal with pluralism using liberal democratic, structure.
They never really dealt with pluralism. So his point is that when 80% of Americans were nominally Christian, it created this fantasy that we could park our religion at the door and just have discussions in Congress and in different arenas where we don't have to talk about religion because we all basically are following the same religion. And we never dealt with real pluralism. So all of the talk about that multiculturalism, diversity is our strength, that all was taking place in an arena in which the vast majority of people were getting their moral intuitions from the same place. So there was a lack of true diversity. And so we could say things like that, and we didn't actually pay the price or see the massive disunity that was going to create. But once true pluralism came in, something shifted. And this is where Keller's going next.
And when real pluralism came along, we found out we couldn't abide it. And so now here's the first thing that happened. The first group of people that actually moved away from liberal democracy into we're going to impose our worldview on you were the progressives. They were the first people to start doing it. Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury, former, he calls it programmatic secularism rather than procedural secularism. In other words, it used to be the government was secular in the sense of being a neutral umpire and said, okay, we want to make sure everybody has a level playing field to make your case and live your lives. But programmatic secularism goes like this. Put it this way. In the 60s and 70s, even the 50s, if somebody wrote a book.
He's going to give a good example here, but let me just make sure you understand what he's saying. That there was a time in which this idea that we are parking our religion at the door, and as we would engage in politics or government, it would stay totally neutral. What began to happen was that the progressives wanted to bring the full weight of their ideas and enforce them in government circles and say that you are not allowed to be a part of the political arena if you don't share our programmatic secularism. And he's going to give an example of how that happened.
Book saying it's okay to be gay. That would probably be not publishable because it would be banned as obscene speech, right? Today, if you try to write a book or say it's not okay to be gay, now it's also condemned as obscene speech, except it's called hate speech. And what's happened is there was a kind of hegemony. It wasn't pluralistic. There was a kind of nominal Christian hegemony that really did run things. And when that fell apart, now we realize, well, who's going to get in charge of defining hate speech and obscene speech? And progressives said, we're going to do it. And so what they actually have done is they are imposing a kind of programmatic, hard secularism. And conservatives and Christians have seen that. They say, you know what, you're not being neutral anymore. You're really actually pushing. You're actually saying you have to keep your religion totally, totally private, when our religion doesn't allow that. Now, by the way, it's the same problem with Islam. So they're going to have more Muslims that are here that will probably going to have there too.
Okay, so a big challenge is that the secular world has begun to define, when Christians are bringing their morality, their worldview into the public sphere, they're imposing religion on laws, they're imposing morality. And when people that are participating in programmatic secularism, saying that it is now hate speech to believe what a nominal Christian believed 20 years ago about, for example, gay marriage, that is not somehow bringing their worldview, their religion into the public arena. And so this has put Christians at an enormous disadvantage, because we can be labeled with that label. This is religious or moral thinking that you're imposing on us, and somehow you are violating the separation of church and state. But then they bring the full weight of their worldview, the full weight of their moral intuitions that are brand new, that are totally different than the way that people were thinking just 20 or 30 years ago. And that there needs to actually be a true political battle that has to happen in the public arena. This is when we really need to be able to negotiate. This is when we really need to have a neutral arbiter helping us work this out. But now that is beginning to erode, because we've never actually experienced what happens when the foundations of what that neutral arbiter is attempting to do, these arenas, these places like the Supreme Court or like Congress, we don't know how to actually share this space in a truly pluralistic way. And it's interesting, Keller gets pretty dark about the implications of this as he kind of wraps up his thoughts here.
But the issue is that conservatives are pushing back, wrongly, I think, and are saying, yeah, liberal democracy doesn't work. There's a lot of conservatives who we need Christian nationalism. We actually need to get, the state needs to be overtly Christian, overtly Protestant, or there needs to be, the Catholic integralists say that the Catholic Church should be the state church. And what they're saying is there's absolutely no way to get that moral consensus. We're always going to be fragmented. Liberal democracy doesn't work. And it is a crisis, because the fact is, as long as everybody was a nominal Christian, liberal democracy works, and it doesn't. We're not that anymore. Liberal democracy undermined Christianity and religion in general, and created the situation where we truly are divided. And now the old liberal democratic proceduralism doesn't bring us together. We're just at each other's throats. We have alternate views of reality, totally different views of reality. And I don't have a good way forward. I mean, if you were asking me that question, I'm not going to answer it, because I'm actually thinking it out. I still think liberal democracy is way better than Catholic integralism or Protestant Christian nationalism. But I also feel like you've got to call out the progressives, to say this, what you consider democracy actually isn't. It is actually an imposition of your worldview on us.
That's a pretty tough line that Keller is saying. I don't know the answer to this question, but I know it's not that the Catholics will impose their vision of morality, or the Protestants through Christian nationalism will impose their vision of morality. I know it's not one of those, but I don't know what it is. It is still the liberal project that there is sort of a neutral field in which we can all somehow, an arena where, even though we live in different universes, we can come together and make decisions from totally opposing moral intuitions about the world. This is the crisis. This is such an enormous crisis our country is about to go through, again, because we've never seen this really work. There is no real true example of where liberal democracy worked outside of there being a consensus about where the morality was coming from. One of the things really unique about Christianity is it provides a moral intuition that allows for liberal democracy. And most moral intuitions will not do that. It doesn't make a lot of sense for somebody who's sort of secular progressive to say, wow, when you say that out loud, you can cost the lives of a trans person. So you cannot say that out loud. That is hate speech. Well, that makes a lot of sense. If they actually believe that, then why wouldn't they make that kind of speech outlawed? And of course, that intuition can go all the way down into virtually anything that you might say that violates their worldview. Probably could have this massive bad, deleterious effect on another human being, and therefore speech can be violence. And I think that there's a continuity to that idea. The thing that's unusual about Christianity is that Christianity sort of grants that and says, but we're in a very unusual chapter of the story where we have a Lord who's commanded us to make disciples through persuasion and not through violence. So even though people's speech is sending other people to hell, we still cannot use the sword in any way to coerce people. Those two ideas are deeply in tension within Christianity, but it makes sense because Jesus is like, I want to give you time before I return and rule the world as its rightful king. I do have all authority, but I want you to, instead of go conquer the world with the sword, go and make disciples. That decision on the part of our king, our Lord, and the ultimate Lord and King of the world to say, I want to open up a chapter of the story in which persuasion through conversation is the primary means of evangelism and discipleship, not coercion through power. It's that move that Jesus makes that actually creates this weird thing we call liberal democracy. Keller's describing here. There is no other worldview that does this. Islam is not going to do this. Believe me, secular atheism is not going to do this. It's not coherent. It's only coherent within a Christian worldview. And that's why that famous, John Adams quote that people are using a lot of times where they said this particular form of government was made for a moral and religious people. It would not be suitable for any other. That statement is a statement made that is unique about Christianity. And so what do we do? And Keller doesn't really have a great answer. And Sam kind of unpacks kind of where things are unraveling here.
So I feel like we have to call both sides out. But when I do that, I am, maybe Carrie, I am called both sidism, playing, or being, trying to be apolitical when you can't be. I don't think that's possible. But I do think it's fair to say, sorry, right and left, I don't know what the alternative is, but what you are proposing is absolutely wrong. Will never really work.
So interesting stuff from Tim Keller. Although if you've watched this channel enough times, you've seen that clip enough times, it's sort of hard to avoid. So let's see here. One thing I didn't mention last time was mainline Christianity. And a couple of you in the comment section sort of pointed that out, like, you seemed like you missed an opportunity to talk about mainline Christianity. And so mainline Christianity comes from the name of a train line that was built in Philadelphia, among the first commuter train lines in the world in the 1880s. The Philadelphia elite left the stinky, dirty, dangerous city and built what we now call suburbs with safe, good schools. And
I like what Sam does here because I do think it's important to point out what actually was bringing people together with one single moral intuition about the world. It wasn't real robust Christianity. It wasn't sort of Jesus is Lord and King over all. It was something that was that involved people going to church on Sunday, hearing a sermon, and just being nominally Christian. And so, in some ways, I'm kind of glad this is eroding. Sam kind of walks through why the main lines are eroding so quickly, and we don't know what it's like to live on the other side of what we're about to encounter. True pluralism, true diversity of thought, attempting to compete in an arena. And when Keller says the first people that kind of crossed the Rubicon and began to impose their vision on us were the progressives. Again, I think the reason for that is that their religion, their worldview, does not create this prohibition against coercion that we have within Christianity. And so it doesn't make sense for them to abide by those intuitions or those rules. And again, it's important for Christians to understand that those rules that Jesus imposed on us as Christians are very surprising. And we have to accept them. And it makes sense if you understand the arc of the story that we're in, that there's a limited amount of time to win people to the gospel, and that people are saved by faith. In other words, what they trust and believe in. And therefore, it's critical that we only use tools that inspire trust and faith, not tools that create coercion to behaviors. And that's the real difference. And for anyone who has a different worldview, they're going to believe inevitably in violent coercion, because that actually is more coherent in terms of if something's actually causing harm to others, it makes sense for us to use the full power of violent coercion to stop that harm from happening. And so words can do that. Again, it's Christianity that's very odd here. And so we have a certain kind of incredible window that we lived through, where Christianity, through the mainline denominations that had this incredible amount of adherence in our culture, in the West, that it opened this unusual door for this kind of liberal democracy that allowed an arena in which secular people could live in and thrive. But that is going away. Keller has no answer to this question. And we have to start having this very difficult conversation about what's on the other side of that. So I'll let Sam finish his thoughts here.
Big yards. I live on the Chicago North Shore, which is named after the North Shore train line built around the same time and for the same reason. The mainline churches are Congregationalists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists, Unitarians, and maybe Northern Baptists. All have their origins in England and would primarily be ethnically WASPs. Lutherans are close to being the mainline church, but their Germanic origins sort of exclude them. But just like how a train is led by the first engine car, Unitarianism was the engine car leading all the other mainline churches in a liberalizing direction. Each was following at a certain distance. The Congregationalists, especially the United Church of Christ, seemed to be first behind. Episcopalians were pretty close. Methodists and the Baptists might have been furthest behind. But nevertheless, the destination was the same. The self-emptying pattern that allowed moralistic therapeutic deism, or Unitarianism, to accommodate ever greater diversity was eventually asked of these traditions as well. While the vestments, buildings, and liturgical details might still distinguish the different kinds of mainline churches, the theology converged into the same moralistic therapeutic deism, mimicking Unitarianism at the front of the train. However, Unitarianism wasn't copying this from anybody. They were the inventor. It wasn't imitating anyone. It was inventing and disseminating this liberalizing trend as it went along. And basically, all mainline churches have become openly pro-gay marriage and pro-pride flag now. I think originally the mainline custodians of moralistic therapeutic deism hoped to maintain their place controlling the levers of power available to the background religion directors and accommodate the pride movement. But this seems to have largely failed. These churches are just plain dying demographically. The new cutting edge of the LGBTQ plus crowd doesn't really seem interested in going to any of these mainline churches, no matter how many pride flags they wave.
That's for sure. So this is one of the biggest mistakes that the mainline made, and they are making it, and they are doubling and tripling down on it, is they have made the mistake that they will endlessly accommodate sort of this secular Unitarian vision of the world that doesn't actually prize allegiance to the teachings of Jesus as its primary motivator. It's like, no, we are just a part of the culture, and we're going to accommodate endlessly the moral vision that is happening within our culture as it shifts. And that's been an absolute disaster because there is no reason for churches like that to exist. That's just normal secular life, unless you just want to get together as some kind of a club. But why not get around some other reason than just slapping the name Christian on it? And so those mainline denominations are completely melting away. They're not going to exist in any kind of influential way. They're going to continue to shrink and get older. And so what is left? What is left in how do we proceed from here? And so this fight, this conversation within Christianity is erupting in a major way. Tim Keller could not take us across this next threshold. So he is now gone, and he admitted, shortly before he died, I don't have an answer to this. I just don't think it involves us all becoming Catholic or us all becoming Christian nationalists. And it's really difficult to know whether or not his intuitions about the nature of liberal, secular kind of democracy is what caused him to make those assumptions. Because I think we actually have to take a very careful look at those possibilities. We are living through this question of, can true diversity, true pluralism actually exist? There is not a great answer to that question, but every time we're trying to get closer to it, there is power plays on the other side that make that virtually impossible for us. We will be pushed out of the public square. And as a lot of demographers have really noticed, that when that happens to Christianity, and when Christianity sort of lays down and says, we're just going to let you push us out, it's not that more people become Christians. It's that those areas become hyper-secularized, and that the areas in which the Christians have allowed themselves to be pushed out because maybe somebody labeled what they were doing as political. What has occurred in all of those places is that the churches have not been thriving, and people have not been coming to Christ, and the intuitions of the people within those cities and in those nations become increasingly secular and very antagonistic towards Christianity. And so this is this. So there's sort of a pragmatic question here. What's actually in people's best interest? Is it for us to become very politically engaged and to go down this pathway that looks more like Christian nationalism, or is it to become increasingly disengaged and say, even if that means that pragmatically we're going to lose enormous numbers of adherents, people are not going to receive the gospel, our ideas about our worldview are going to become increasingly unplausible to normal people. But that's just those are the only ways in which Jesus allows us to function. So not only does Jesus say no violence, but he's also going to say to us no politicking, and anybody that can slap the label of political on anything we're talking about, we have to immediately back away from that thing. Now, I think that that's very dangerous as well. And so I think this is why we need to really consider whether or not we need to become just much more active in these kinds of conversations, that we need to stake out places in those arenas and take the hits that are going to be natural, that are going to come with that engagement, right? Jesus made very clear, look, the world's not going to like you. You're going to be persecuted. But I need you to be very active. And you see as the book of Acts unfolds that they were being persecuted for not saying Caesar is Lord. In other words, for engaging in a political argument, but bringing their allegiance to Jesus to bear on what was, for most people, just an obvious sort of political policy, which is that we all, no matter what we believe about God, have to agree that Caesar is Lord. And if you can just grant us that, we can grant you your faith in this new religion. That was a non-starter for early Christians, and they paid an enormous price for taking that stand. There were other stands as well, but that was the one that was most costly. And I think we're going to face a similar kind of set of sort of politically coded areas where we're going to have to carve out a place of real allegiance to Christ that is going to fly in the face of what many people that are wanting us to back away from politics or enter into a purely non-religious but secular arena are going to really struggle with any kind of decisions we make to have those kinds of uncompromising stands in a public space. That's going to be hard on a lot of people who are just used to this old world that does not exist anymore. We are in a brave new world, and we need to figure out what to do on this side of that transition. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening.